Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the golden sands of ancient Egypt, where gods meddle in romance, love notes are carved in stone, and your average date might involve a Nile crocodile watching from the reeds. You're lying on a linen mat, the sun's just begun to rise, and the air already smells like heat and dust and incense. Outside, barefoot priests chant to the goddess Hathor, while servants sweep sand from the temple floor. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You blink groggily, the morning light glowing through a woven reed screen. Welcome to ancient Memphis, or maybe Thebes. It's hard to tell before coffee was invented. The earth smells of warm clay, and outside, the Nile's waters slosh softly against the banks. You stretch on a cotton sheet and squint up at a mural painted on your ceiling. Hathor, goddess of love, cow ears and all, with her arms raised in a dance that suggests more than just religious devotion. Here, sex wasn't just a biological urge, it was divine energy. The gods didn't shy away from it either. Take Atum, for example, the creator god. According to the Heliopolitan myth, Atum created the world by, how do we say this gently, pleasuring himself. Yep, the universe began with a solo act, and Egyptians didn't see anything scandalous in that. Creation and eroticism went hand in hand, and that sacred link flowed right into everyday life. You sit up and slip on a simple linen tunic. Egyptian clothing was ideal for the heat, and it wasn't uncommon for both men and women to wear lightweight garments that left little to the imagination. But despite this minimalism, sexuality wasn't wild or unchecked. In fact, Egyptians were pretty balanced in their views. Sex was natural, important, and sacred, but it wasn't meant for spectacle. Think spiritual function, not frat party. You step into the courtyard, where an offering is being placed at a family shrine. A carved figure of Bees, the dwarf god who protected households and women in labor, sits nearby. Bees wasn't exactly sexy, more like a hairy goblin with a drum, but he was crucial when it came to love and fertility. Expectant mothers prayed to him, and he even shows up carved on bedposts, supposedly warding off nightmares and maybe bad dates. You head toward the river, passing a young couple exchanging lotus flowers and giggles. Courtship here wasn't as dry as the papyrus it was sometimes written on. Egyptians valued affection and partnership. Love poetry, some preserved in flowing hieratic script, describes lovers' longing with words that still sting with sweetness. One reads, "My heart is in mourning for your love, I will lie down at the door of your house." Not exactly subtle, right? But while romance was often poetic, it was also practical. Most Egyptians married young, teenage years were common, and for many marriage was more about stability and property than passion. Still, love wasn't excluded. In fact, inscriptions often celebrate a husband's devotion or a wife's beauty. The one tomb painting even shows a husband holding his wife's hand, a rare gesture in most ancient art, and a quiet testimony to how much emotional closeness mattered. Now, here's where it gets a little weird. The Nile itself had erotic overtones. Its flooding was viewed as symbolic fertility, the land becoming pregnant with crops. The goddess Isis was often connected with the Nile's nurturing waters, and some rituals reportedly involved symbolic acts of union between priestesses and representations of the divine. Whether that meant literal intimacy, or just symbolic rites, well, historians still argue whether those ceremonies involved actual physical acts or dramatic reenactments. Of course, not all beliefs were metaphoric. You pass a mud brick shrine, where an older woman is sprinkling herbs into the dirt. She's performing a spell for love, calling on Hathor, or maybe the lion-headed Sekhmet, who could switch from affectionate to terrifying overnight. Love spells were big business in Egypt. People used incantations, charms and even magical dolls to attract or repel romantic partners. So next time you see a modern breakup text, remember it's got 3,000-year-old magical roots. Oh, and speaking of divine matches, many Egyptians believed in soulmates. The idea of the Ka, a person's spiritual double, sometimes extended to relationships. Two people whose Kas matched were thought to have a destined bond. That romantic connection could even continue into the afterlife, where couples hoped to reunite on the field of reeds, ancient Egypt's version of heaven. You return home as the sun climbs higher, the heat now shimmering in golden waves. Maybe you're still wondering, was all this divine love as beautiful as it sounds? Well, yes and no. There was passion, but also politics, spirituality, but also control. The gods may have loved freely, but real people still had to deal with awkward first dates, family expectations, and smelly feet after walking through temple courtyards barefoot. Even now, as you lie back on a woven mat with a slight breeze drifting through the shutters, you realize that ancient Egyptian intimacy wasn't so different from modern life, except with more amulets, fewer emojis, and the occasional erotic hymn written in hieroglyphs. The wig itches. You scratch discreetly under its perfumed layers as you stroll through the inner garden of a grand estate in Thebes. The air here is heavy with blue lotus blossoms, thick with sweet-smelling oil, and yes, your hair isn't really yours. Wigs were more than fashion. They were part hygiene, part heat control, and very much a status symbol. And in the game of attraction in ancient Egypt, status was everything. The servant glides past with a tray of date cakes and fermented beer, her tunic immaculate, her coal-lined eyes lowered. You're headed toward a pavilion, where a group of young nobles lounges on low cushions, fanning themselves and murmuring about temple gossip, who was caught sneaking into the scribe's chamber, who's suddenly making more offerings to Hathor than usual. The kind of chatter that makes you lean in, even though you pretend you're too dignified to care. In ancient Egypt, beauty wasn't just admired, it was cultivated. Men and women alike shaved their bodies, painted their eyes, and oiled their skin until it gleamed. You probably smell like a mix of myrrh, cinnamon, and crushed acacia pods by now, and that's not an accident. Scent was seduction. One love poem even compares a lover's body to incense. Your fragrance is in all my limbs. Your hostess, a high-ranking lady married to someone too old and too often away, smiles a little too long in your direction. Her lipstick is carmine, her hair piled high with beads. This is how it worked. Attraction was visual, symbolic, and layered. The wealthy displayed their desirability through refinement, cleanliness, and perfectly arranged artifice. And that includes wigs. Real human hair, sometimes enhanced with sheep's wool or palm fibers, was braided, curled, and steeped in sweet oils. Some wigs were so elaborate, they required assistants to wear. You imagine trying to flirt while balancing a half-pound tower of woven hair, and suddenly understand why ancient flattery often focused on grace and posture. Here, at this lazy garden gathering, people read poetry aloud, plucked stringed instruments, and exchanged riddles with double meanings. It's a kind of sensual chess match, all within the rules of polite society. But don't be fooled. Just because everyone looks serene doesn't mean the air isn't charged. In these settings, lovers found each other. You listen as a man recites a verse about a woman's eyes. They ensnare me like the net ensnares the goose. She replies with a line about his voice being more beautiful than a harp. Is this the ancient version of flirting through song lyrics? Maybe. Except these lyrics could get you married. Now, let's zoom out from the poetry cushions to a broader truth. Attraction was a reflection of harmony. Mart, the guiding principle of balance in Egyptian life. Even physical love needed to fit into that order. Beauty was a sign of cosmic alignment. A well-kohled eye wasn't just pretty. It echoed the eye of Horus, symbol of protection and completeness. Wearing makeup then wasn't vanity. It was sacred geometry. This also explains the intense etiquette of these elite circles. You couldn't just grab someone's hand in public. No sudden kisses. Love had to be subtle, performed in layers like an onion soaked in perfume. And the more refined your gestures, the more desirable you were thought to be. A good match wasn't just about feelings. It was about refinement, poise, and knowing how to pour a drink without splashing it on your finely pleated linen. Still, that didn't stop anyone from pushing the limits behind closed doors. Some noble women kept lovers discreetly tucked away, and elite men weren't exactly faithful monks. Historians still argue whether these dalliances were tolerated or merely well hidden, but tomb murals rarely snitch. In fact, they tend to depict happy couples, serene domestic scenes, and affectionate gestures, perhaps a little PR from the afterlife. By mid-afternoon, you find yourself back indoors, lying on a low couch, while someone fans you with ostrich feathers. You sip diluted wine from a ceramic goblet, and your mind drifts. What was it like, you wonder, to be genuinely in love in this world of arranged marriages and symbolic gestures? Well, the evidence suggests many couples really did care for each other. Some tomb inscriptions express deep affection and mutual respect. One man describes his wife as the lady of the house, beloved of my heart, who made my years sweet. Another praises his partner for making beer and weaving cloth, which for the time was basically love poetry. Attraction in ancient Egypt wasn't a wild, impulsive affair. It was a slow burn wrapped in ceremony and grace. A glance might last just long enough to be scandalous, and a touch of the hand could feel like fireworks. You think of the nobles in their scented wigs and polished sandals, playing this careful game of suggestion and restraint. Then again, some folks didn't play the game so carefully. One preserved letter from the Ramesside period reveals a scandal. A high priest caught sending love notes to a woman already engaged to someone else. The punishment, a public shaming and temple banishment. So yes, drama existed, even with all the incense and sacred eyeliner. As the sun sinks low, casting gold onto the alabaster walls, the estate slowly empties. You walk through the courtyard again, past half-faded frescoes of dancing girls and harpists. Somewhere behind a column, two people whisper and giggle in a way that's older than writing. It's comforting, really, how attraction survives across millennia, changing costumes but never losing its script. You pause, adjust your wig still itchy, and take in one last lungful of Blue Lotus before heading inside. Tomorrow there'll be more poetry, more looks exchanged across shaded pavilions. But for now, all is still. You're standing in front of the palace. The outer courtyards hum with life, servants, officials, guards, messengers, and yet all eyes instinctively lower as the golden doors swing open. The pharaoh is coming. You bow along with everyone else, but curiosity gets the better of you. Just what exactly happened behind those walls, especially when it came to love, desire, and royal privilege. Inside the palace, everything is cool and shaded. Carved columns rise like papyrus stalks, painted in green and blue. Incense wafts gently through the halls, and somewhere in the distance, musicians pluck at lyres. You follow the sound to a quieter part of the complex, where real power lounges behind curtains and protocol. Here's the thing, sex for the pharaoh wasn't just about personal enjoyment. It was a ritual, a performance of cosmic duty. When the king took a wife, or multiple wives, it wasn't simply to satisfy desire. It was to affirm divine order, ensure fertility, and project dominance. After all, he wasn't just any man, he was Horus in human form, and Horus had a reputation to uphold. Royal marriages were strategic. Daughters of nobles, high priestesses, and even foreign princesses were often brought in to strengthen alliances. Some historians argue that the pharaoh's principal wife, often titled Great Royal Wife, held considerable influence, not just in domestic life, but in ceremonial roles as well. Think queen, diplomat, and fertility goddess rolled into one. But then there were the other women. You pass through a stone corridor, lined with painted scenes, dancers in linen skirts, musicians frozen mid-note, couples reclining under vine-covered trellises. These aren't depictions of everyday peasants. This is the royal harem, a word that gets misunderstood a lot. It wasn't some endless orgy, or locked-up gaggle of women. It was more like a small city within the palace, organized, hierarchical, and deeply political. The harem included wives, concubines, and their children, along with tutors, nurses, guards, and administrators. Some women held genuine sway, others were barely noticed. Love may have bloomed, but more often, it was maneuvered. The pharaoh might choose a favorite, not because of love poems or shared hobbies, but because she bore him a strong son, or came from a strategically useful family. That said, ancient letters reveal tenderness too. One pharaoh reportedly wrote to a wife abroad saying, "May you know I sleep and wake with thoughts only of you." Romantic, or good PR. Inside a side chamber, you spot an alabaster bed platform. No mattress, just carved slats, a reed mat, and probably a stiff neck afterward. Bees, that cheerfully grotesque protector god, is carved into the headboard again, presumably there to keep nightmares and curses away. It's hard to imagine this as a romantic setting, but for a royal couple, this might have been where dynasties were conceived, and not just one dynasty at a time. The pharaoh's role in sustaining the bloodline meant multiple partners. It wasn't about monogamy, it was about continuity. Historians still debate whether certain pharaohs truly loved their partners, or merely fulfilled their role. Take Akhenaten and Nefertiti. Their public imagery shows real closeness, shared kisses, tender glances, but was it authentic affection, or state-sponsored couple branding? We may never know. You slip into the palace's record-keeping hall, where scribes document births, offerings, and yes, scandals. One scroll details a prince accused of seducing a high priestess. The punishment, exile, and the erasure of his name. In ancient Egypt, being forgotten was worse than death. Desire might have been divine, but rules still applied. especially when they were broken. And then there's the pharaoh's marriage to the land. Symbolic unions were sometimes conducted between the king and a goddess, often represented by a priestess or statue. These rituals weren't just metaphor. They affirmed the king's connection to divine fertility and his role in keeping Egypt prosperous. One obscure rite even involved the pharaoh symbolically fertilizing the soil during the New Year's festival. Again, whether this was literal or entirely ceremonial, historians still argue whether such acts were dramatizations or deeply literal. In the quiet of the palace garden, you notice an elderly woman tending to pomegranate trees. She's a former concubine, now living out her years in comfort. Not all harem women remained rivals or anonymous. Some outlived kings and went on to raise sons who would later fight for the throne. Being chosen wasn't just a romantic turn, it was a lifelong shift in destiny. At night, you lie beneath a painted ceiling of stars. In the hush of the royal chambers, everything is controlled. Gestures, titles, whispers, even intimacy, in these halls, was bound by expectation. The pharaoh had to perform, not just personally, but publicly, through rituals, heirs, alliances, and appearances. Love, if it existed, had to navigate a minefield of politics. Still, as you drift off to sleep under the scent of myrrh, you can almost hear soft laughter from beyond a curtain. Maybe the pharaoh himself, sharing a private joke with someone he trusted. Because even beneath the crown, even inside the cold stone walls of ritual and rank, people were still people. Some longed, some deceived, some loved. You wake to the distant rhythm of reed flutes and footsteps in sand. Today, you're far from palace walls. Out in the bright dust of a small village by the Nile, the river shimmers nearby, a ribbon of green life slicing through the ochre landscape. And here, among mud brick homes and bustling neighbors, we find the real Egypt, the daily, unpolished, unscented Egypt. This is where most people lived, and where love and intimacy looked a lot different than inside the royal court. You duck under a low doorway and into a shaded room. A wife is grinding barley into flour, while her husband weaves a fishing net. Their youngest child chews a fig on the floor. There's no perfume here, no silk wigs, just sweat, clay, and the quiet hum of a life shared. Marriage for ordinary Egyptians wasn't always arranged, and it wasn't ceremonial in the way modern weddings are. In fact, there were often no official documents at all. You moved in together, maybe received gifts from each other's families, and that was it. You were married. Property and inheritance could be tracked in contracts, but love, that part wasn't notarized. Still, affection existed here, deeply, in letters and stelae from working-class people. We see pet names, sweet teases, and even a bit of sass. One husband calls his wife "my lotus," while asking her to please stop overspending at the market. Another woman scolds her lover for not writing back sooner, warning that she might find someone with better handwriting. You laugh quietly. Some things never change. Inside the home, you see something often left out of romantic histories: partnership. The couple works together. She bakes, he fishes. She brews beer, he barters for goatskin. Ancient Egyptian marriages were economic units, teams that kept a household afloat. If there was romance, it was often grounded in survival. But don't mistake that for coldness. After all, what's more intimate than growing old side by side, while raising children, surviving floods, and rationing grain? In the back room, their daughter is combing her hair with a carved ivory pick. She hums a hymn to Hathor, the goddess of love and joy, under her breath. Hathor wasn't just worshipped in temples. She lived in the home, in laughter, music, and flirtation. Girls often prayed to her for beauty, for marriage, or just for that cute boy at the market to finally notice them. Which brings us to one essential ritual, the love spell. Yes, ancient Egyptians used magic for matters of the heart. Sometimes it was harmless, a charm to increase one's beauty, or ensure a husband stayed loyal. Other times, things got darker. Love spells etched on pottery shards included hair clippings, fingernails, and incantations meant to stir obsession or sexual desire. Historians still argue whether these spells were purely symbolic or believed to have real power. Either way, someone definitely buried a wax effigy under a rival's threshold once, just to be safe. Back in the village square, people gather around a traveling musician who sings of a girl with eyes like two black bees. Teenagers giggle. A mother rolls her eyes. But even in this dusty, practical world, imagination flourishes. Love poems, some shockingly tender, some hilariously blunt, were composed and copied across centuries. One favorite verse reads, "I am in your grasp like the wild goose, I cannot escape your net." Another simply pleads, "Let us lie together until the day breaks." Not bad for a civilization older than the Roman Empire by thousands of years. And yes, they had birth control. Well, sort of. Recipes mixed crocodile dung, honey and acacia to create pessaries, which were inserted for contraception. Was it effective? Probably not. Was it comfortable? Absolutely not. But it was innovative. And remember, this was 3,000 years before modern medicine. Give them some credit, they were trying. As the sun rises higher, a wedding procession begins. The bride wears a garland of flowers and a sheer linen dress, while musicians lead her to her new home. There's no priest, no temple, just family, music, and dancing. You can't help but smile. It feels like joy, not obligation. And somewhere in the crowd, you spot a shy boy, holding out a painted token, a tiny amulet of Hathor, shaped like a cow's face, to the girl he likes. You trail behind the dancers as they wind through the village paths. No gold, no pomp, no royal decree, just a belief that love was a blessing, and life was better shared. There's a strength to this simplicity, a comfort in the routine of two people waking together, working together, and growing old under the same sun. And when love failed, it wasn't the end of the world. Divorce was allowed, and both partners could remarry. Property was usually divided fairly, and the community moved on. No public scandal, no banishment, just life, unfussy, imperfect, persistent. You sit down on a warm stone, watching the villagers dance past, the beat of the drum fading into the distance. You realize that while the pharaohs wrote love into stone, and nobles powdered themselves into poetry, it's here, in the dust and laughter of the villagers, that love endured most quietly. You wake with the scent of crushed herbs in your nose, and a curious ache in your lower back. Maybe it's from the hard straw bed, or maybe from that experimental crocodile dung contraceptive you saw someone mixing yesterday. Either way, today you're headed to a very different kind of institution, the Temple of Hathor. You follow a caravan of women up a worn stone path, flanked by blooming sycamores. Some wear festival garlands, others clutch tiny offerings, figs, lotus petals, tiny carved beads. The temple looms ahead, its facade carved with smiling goddesses and cow-eared deities. You're entering the sacred heart of ancient Egyptian sensuality, music, and divine femininity. Inside, it's cool and dim, lit by slits in the ceiling. The air is rich with myrrh. Statues of Hathor smile knowingly down from their pedestals. And in the inner sanctum, priestesses prepare for the day's rituals that, despite what later prudes might tell you, absolutely celebrated the body and its pleasures. Hathor wasn't just the goddess of love. She governed music, joy, dance, fertility, and motherhood. A kind of divine multitasker. Her festivals were raucous affairs. Imagine something between a wine-soaked rave and a fertility workshop led by a cow-headed goddess. Drums pounded through the night. Women danced until sunrise. Offerings poured in, grapes, perfume, cakes, shaped like thighs. It sounds like a party, and it was, but it was also sacred. Pleasure for ancient Egyptians wasn't shameful. It was divine. To enjoy life, sensually, bodily, joyfully, was a way of honoring the gods. Some scholars believe the festival of drunkenness, held in her honor, encouraged ritual intoxication as a form of spiritual cleansing. Others think it was an excuse for elite women to let their hair down, literally. Historians still argue whether these events were controlled state rituals or moments of genuine communal liberation. You walk past painted reliefs showing women playing sistra, those U-shaped rattles sacred to Hathor, and men offering incense beneath vines. One scene shows a priestess nursing a child while smiling up at the goddess. Another shows a couple reclining on cushions, attended by servants with wine. These aren't shameful images, they're affirmations of life. And the temple wasn't just about public spectacle, it was a safe space, especially for women. Some priestesses were unmarried, others were widows or even former concubines. Their roles weren't passive. They led chants, performed rites, and interpreted dreams. One high priestess even corresponded directly with Pharaoh, giving advice during a famine. Not too shabby for 1250 BCE. You're ushered into a smaller chamber where a group of girls are learning to sing sacred hymns. Their voices echo gently against the sandstone walls. Their teacher, an older woman with coal-lined eyes and a spine like a steel beam, corrects them sharply when they miss a note. This isn't just music class, it's religious preparation. In festivals, these girls would become living vessels of the goddess, channeling Hathor's joy through every beat and sway. In a back chamber, you see a different side of temple life, healing. Hathor was also called upon during childbirth, and many women came here seeking blessings for fertility. Priests and priestesses offered herbal remedies, amulets, and whispered prayers over the bellies of hopeful mothers. You watch one woman press her forehead to a carved image of Hathor giving birth, her lips moving silently. And there's sex magic here too, though no one calls it that out loud. Some inscriptions in hidden chambers describe rites involving symbolic union with the divine. Were these metaphorical? Possibly. Were they acted out in private ceremonies? Possibly. Historians still argue whether these sacred unions were literal or symbolic, just like in other ancient religions. Outside in the temple garden, young couples sneak glances at each other between sips of fig wine. One girl drops her scarf, accidentally. A boy retrieves it with the most exaggerated bow you've ever seen. You smile. Some rituals haven't changed in 5,000 years. You sit beside a shallow pool. Blue lotuses float on the surface. Flowers associated with rebirth, the sun, and yes, sexual potency. The lotus closes at night and opens at dawn. Egyptians noticed. They also noticed that the scent of blue lotus might induce mild euphoria. Some priests even infused wine with it during special rites. A natural aphrodisiac, some think so. You reach into the water, gently touch a petal, and reflect. Unlike some later cultures that wrapped sexuality in shame or secrecy, Egypt often placed it right at the center of life. Pleasure wasn't a sin, it was a cycle like the river, the sun, the blooming lotus. To embrace it was to be alive. Still, not everything was idyllic. There were jealousies, betrayals, and scandals. One temple scroll tells of a priestess who tried to curse her rival's fertility, only to find herself struck with sudden baldness. Was it divine punishment or temple politics? Either way, she wore a wig after that. A fabulous one, apparently. As night falls, the temple begins to quiet. The last echoes of the sistrum fade into the perfumed dusk. The priestesses light oil lamps, and shadows dance along the walls. You close your eyes and hear it all again. Music, laughter, whispered prayers. In this sacred place, love and spirit were never separate. And tomorrow, you'll follow the scent of oil and coal to a city where seduction had its own language and its own consequences. By morning, the sand carries the faint smell of incense and roasted grain, but also a new tension, something sharper, more calculating. You're no longer in a peaceful village or temple. This is the city, maybe Thebes or Memphis, and you've just stepped into its tangled web of marketplaces, taverns, and hidden whispers. It's here that love becomes a game. And like any game, there are rules, many unwritten, and some enforced with a razor-sharp bronze mirror. Your feet crunch over limestone paving as you move through the crowds. Traders hawk papyrus, perfume, and fish, fresh from the Nile. But your eyes are drawn to another kind of commerce entirely, one hidden behind silk curtains and smoky doorways. You follow the scent of myrrh and rose oil into a narrow lane where women lounge on shaded balconies, their laughter low and practiced. This is where seduction lived in ancient Egypt, not in novels or fantasies, but in glances, gifts, and power. You're in the realm of the courtesan. Unlike in later societies where working women were hidden or scorned, ancient Egypt had a surprisingly fluid approach to such roles. While some women did sell pleasure in exchange for goods, others became elite companions, trained in music, poetry, and conversation. These weren't just one-night flings. A powerful courtesan could influence politics, access wealth, and secure long-term patronage from priests or even nobles. One famous woman known as Bentrashit sang in the temple of Hathor by day, and some believe entertained royal courtiers by night. Historians still argue whether she was a tragic figure or a cunning social climber. You duck inside a perfumery, where two women argue over which scent drives men mad the fastest. Spoiler, it's probably not the one made of boiled ostrich eggs and cedar shavings. But in this world, scent was everything. Perfume cones melted over wigs at banquets, dripping fragrant oil down the neck. Guests judged each other not just by looks, but by smell. Want to impress someone? Smell like honey and blue lotus. Want to repel them? Smell like yesterday's fish vendor. The stakes were high. A scroll lies open near the shop counter, a manual of sorts. It lists clever phrases, lines of poetry, and tips for impressing lovers. You read one aloud. If you want her heart, bring bread, not promises. Ancient advice, modern relevance. Seduction in Egypt wasn't limited to physical beauty. Intelligence, wit, even handwriting could charm. Yes, handwriting. Several love letters survive from the New Kingdom, where lovers compliment each other's penmanship and spelling. There's something adorable about your elegant way of writing, makes my heart tremble like a duck in spring. You try not to laugh, but it's tough. Of course, not all seductions ended in candlelight and lotus petals. Some spiraled into scandal. One papyrus recounts a love triangle involving a high-ranking priest, a merchant's daughter, and a baker's apprentice. There were midnight rendezvous, stolen amulets, and allegedly a poisoned fig cake. No one died, but the priest did lose his temple post. Even in a culture that embraced passion, discretion still mattered. And then there were legal consequences. Ancient Egyptians had laws, vague and unevenly enforced, about adultery, especially for married women. A nobleman might face little more than a stern letter, but a woman caught in an affair could be divorced, publicly shamed, or worse. One surviving record describes a woman accused of corrupting the household through excessive flirtation. The punishment? 10 lashes and exile to her family home. Not death, but certainly not a spa retreat. Still, many women took the risk, not out of recklessness, but for agency. Love in all its messy forms was sometimes the only tool they had to control their futures. A strategic romance could bring food, shelter, or social mobility. Others simply craved the thrill, a moment of softness in a world ruled by grain quotas and household ledgers. You pass a wine shop where older women gossip with the owner, trading tips on how to keep their husbands interested. One suggests shaving off all her body hair and covering herself in acacia sap. Another recommends tying a love amulet made of copper wire and carnelian around the ankle. Science? Maybe not. Effort? Absolutely. Outside, you see children playing a game called Catch the Heart. It involves passing a carved heart token while reciting rhymes. Loser gets a splash of river water to the face. It's innocent now, but it's clear that even the young were taught that love is a pursuit, a chase, a delicate gamble. You step into a scribe's workshop where a young woman is practicing ink strokes. She's writing the same phrase over and over. May my lover's heart be light as the papyrus reed. Her teacher, a grizzled man with inky fingers, mutters something about emotions being the enemy of spelling. She smiles without correcting him, because she knows the real power lies in getting the words just right. And perhaps that's what seduction truly was here. Not manipulation, not deceit, but expression. The ability to paint yourself in words, perfume, silk, and gaze. To craft an image, hold attention, and offer just enough mystery to keep someone leaning closer. As the sun sets, lanterns flicker to life along the alleys. The perfume sellers pack up, the courtesans close their shutters, and somewhere, someone finishes a letter they'll never send. You stand in the glow, thinking not of pharaohs or priestesses, but of all the quiet games played in shadows, the looks, the sighs, the risks. Love in the city is no temple rite. It's a performance, and everyone, willingly or not, becomes a player. The next morning arrives with the clatter of sandals on packed dirt, and the occasional bleat of a goat being very vocal about its breakfast. But you're not lingering in the comfort of domestic scenes today. No. You're heading to one of the more mysterious and misunderstood corners of ancient Egyptian life, the world of temples, gods, and sacred rituals involving the body. Not just spiritual, but physical. Divine encounters in ancient Egypt weren't vague or purely symbolic. They involved touch, scent, rhythm, and sometimes rather suggestive metaphors. You're about to see how religion and sensuality weren't opposites. They were siblings, raised in the same household. You make your way toward a great temple complex. The outer walls are high and decorated with reliefs. Gods walking upright with animal heads. Pharaohs striking poses of dominance over chaos. But step inside, and the mood changes. It's darker, cooler. The scent of incense is so strong it clings to your clothes. Somewhere, a sistrum, a kind of metallic rattle, shakes in rhythmic intervals. And in the far inner sanctum, a statue of a god is being undressed. Yes, undressed. Each day, temple priests performed what was essentially a royal spa treatment for divine statues. The god was awakened with chanting and incense, bathed with purifying oils, dressed in fresh linen, and fed with offerings of bread, beer, and meat. This wasn't just symbolic pampering, it was believed to maintain Ma'at, the cosmic order. If the gods weren't pleased, crops failed, floods didn't come, and society frayed at the edges. The lines between reverence and intimacy blurred. Priests didn't just serve the gods, they touched them, adorned them, whispered to them. and in return they believed they received sacred energy. Historians still argue whether these rituals were purely devotional, or if they fulfilled deeper psychological, even carnal, needs in a society otherwise steeped in modesty. One particularly charged ceremony was the opening of the mouth, a rite often performed on mummies, but originally intended for statues. The priest would touch various parts of the face and body with special tools, opening the eyes, ears, mouth, symbolically reanimating the figure so it could breathe, eat, speak. Imagine standing there, watching a statue slowly wake up through sacred choreography. It's eerie, but undeniably sensual. Now step into the courtyard where dancers move in slow, hypnotic rhythm. They're not just performing, they're invoking Hathor, goddess of love, beauty, music, and fertility. She was often worshipped in a very embodied way. Her festivals involved music, wine, feasting, and yes, dancing that might make your grandma raise an eyebrow. One such festival, the Feast of Drunkenness, was held annually to honor how Hathor once nearly destroyed humanity, only to be calmed by beer dyed red to look like blood. Egyptians would drink copiously, dance under the sun, and seek visions or spiritual messages through intoxication. It was religious ecstasy, quite literally. You'd leave the temple sunburnt, sore-footed, and possibly enlightened, or just dizzy. You pause at a wall relief showing Hathor nursing the pharaoh, who is depicted as a grown man. This isn't awkward to the ancient viewer, it's deeply symbolic. The king is being nurtured by the goddess, receiving divine wisdom and strength. But yes, it still looks a little strange if you're not used to the art style. Religion wasn't confined to temples. Amulets in the shape of body parts, eyes, hands, even genitals, were worn for protection and fertility. Household shrines often included fertility symbols or carved erotic figures meant to encourage conception. One particularly curious object, the Bes statue, a squat, lion-faced dwarf god of household protection and childbearing, often shown sticking out his tongue or dancing wildly. Egyptians loved him so much, they even painted him on bedposts. It wasn't just about reverence, it was about humor, joy, physicality. You begin to understand, to them the divine was not sterile or distant. It was felt, in sweat, in music, in pleasure and fear. One curious papyrus describes dream rituals, where a priestess or initiate might sleep inside the temple, hoping to receive a visit from a god. These dream encounters were personal, sometimes intimate, and sometimes cryptic. A woman might emerge in the morning, saying she was touched by Thoth, or embraced by Amun. What exactly happened in those dreams is left to interpretation, but it left lasting impressions. Historians still debate whether such experiences were psychological projections, drug-induced visions, or simply pious metaphor. But to the Egyptians, the line between physical and spiritual was permeable. The gods weren't just above you, they were in you, on you, and sometimes alarmingly close. And then there's the temple art. In some hidden chambers, rarely seen by outsiders, scenes of fertility rituals appear, figures entwined, offerings being made to iphoric gods like Min, who is always, shall we say, ready for action. His statues often feature lettuce, a plant believed to be both aphrodisiac and spiritually potent. Yes, lettuce. You'll never look at a salad the same way again. You step out into the sunlight again, dazed by the intensity of it all. The music has quieted, but the energy lingers. You realize that for the ancient Egyptians, sacredness wasn't found in denial of the body, but in embracing its rhythms, its urges, and its needs. The gods weren't offended by human passion, they required it, they mirrored it, they mythologized it. Divine love affairs, sacred unions, fertility rites, all reinforced that sensuality was part of the cosmic equation, not a threat to it. So as you watch the final rays of sun cast long shadows across the temple walls, you understand something essential. To the ancient Egyptian, holiness had texture, scent, movement and sound. It was never still, never sterile, it was alive. Night has settled across the Nile Valley again, stars pricking the velvety sky as a cool breeze picks up off the water. You've wandered away from the village's smoky hearths, and toward a quieter, more curious place. The edge of the desert, where the dead rest, and where love letters sometimes outlive the lovers. You're here to explore something less tangible but deeply revealing. The emotional inner lives of the ancient Egyptians, not just what they did, but what they felt. We know they farmed, bartered and worshipped, but they also longed, grieved, swooned and despaired, and they wrote it all down, on shards of pottery, scrolls, walls and coffins. You crouch beside a tomb, not one of the grand pyramids, but a simple rock-cut chamber. The inscription on the wall surprises you. I sleep alone, my heart weeps. It's not a eulogy from a grieving family member. It's a message written by the deceased himself, yearning for a lost love to join him in death. You shiver. That's not just historical data, that's heartbreak in hieroglyphs. Ancient Egyptians had a full emotional vocabulary, from joy to jealousy, from lust to loyalty. Some love poems still survive in the form of courtly stanzas, recorded on fragile papyri or etched into limestone. In one, a woman says, "My heart is not still, it leaps when I see him, like a fish in shallow water." Another line, "I passed by his house 10 times. I am not mad, I am in love." You imagine a modern Egyptian teenager posting that to Instagram under a grainy selfie. History repeats, but not all feelings were warm. Anger, envy, suspicion, those too were scribbled into the record. One letter discovered near the workers' village reads, "You said you'd return with figs. You lied, and my heart is bitter." The drama is undeniable. Scholars debate whether this was meant as a personal letter or part of a play script, but either way, it's spicy. You enter a small tomb chapel, lit only by the flickering torch you carry. On the wall is a depiction of a husband and wife holding hands, not facing forward as usual, but turned toward each other, gazes locked. This is unusual for tomb art. Most pairs are shown side by side, facing eternity with stoic expressions, but here, their faces are soft, smiling. The detail is so delicate that you almost expect them to whisper to one another. Were they especially close, or was the artist commissioned to show them that way? Historians still argue whether affectionate depictions in burial chambers reflected real relationships, or merely ideals the couple wished to carry into the afterlife. Outside, jackals cry in the distance. You imagine an ancient Egyptian mourning a lost partner under the same stars you see now, composing a letter, not for the living, but for the dead. These weren't simply memorials, they were conversations. Some were even folded and left at the tomb, like mail. One famous example from a widow reads, "Why did you leave me? You promised we'd share both life and eternity. My roof leaks. I am angry. Come fix it." Grief and love lived side by side in these expressions. The afterlife wasn't seen as some distant heaven. It was home, continued, a place where love could resume, where arguments could be settled, where you might finally get the last word. Back in town, you stumble upon a festival in progress, perhaps the beautiful Festival of the Valley, when families visited the tombs of their ancestors. People carry food, flowers and wine, but mixed with the revelry is reverence. Children place petals at a mother's grave. A husband drinks quietly beside his wife's resting place. They believe she can hear him. And in this moment, you realize the emotional lives of ancient Egyptians weren't private. They were sacred, expressed publicly, woven into rituals, etched into stone. Your feelings weren't just fleeting sparks. They were eternal threads connecting life, death, and the next life. One man nearby reads aloud from a crumbling letter. It's a love poem, probably passed down generations. You catch the lines, "You are my one, without equal. My legs falter when you pass. I drink your scent as a thirsty man drinks the breeze." The woman beside him rolls her eyes and laughs, but you can see the blush creeping up her cheeks. Even now, after thousands of years, those words still work. You follow a priest as he enters a tomb to perform a ritual reading. He explains more to himself than to you, that love was not just a mortal concern, it bound the soul. A couple properly bonded in life could reunite in the field of reeds, the Egyptian paradise, where they'd farm together without hardship and drink endless cups of wine, without hangovers. A pretty good deal, but just as powerful were the broken bonds. One tomb wall features an eerie warning, "He who cheats love will not cross into the West." This wasn't just emotional melodrama, it was cosmic justice. Love in Egyptian theology was a principle of Mat, universal harmony. Break that, and your soul wandered restlessly. You watch as the priest offers incense and reads a final line. "Though your voice is silent, my heart hears you." He bows, he leaves. You follow, quiet now. There's nothing left to say, just the rustle of wind over sand, and the knowledge that love, even in death, echoed louder than any pharaoh's decree. You wake the next morning to the smell of something sweet wafting from a nearby kitchen, fig cakes maybe, or honey-soaked dates, heating on clay. There's laughter, music, a wedding in the air. You've stumbled into one of the most joyfully chaotic parts of ancient Egyptian life, the ceremonies where love got a public stage, complete with dancing, feasting, and a whole lot of shouting over drums. But don't expect white dresses or bouquets. Ancient Egyptian weddings weren't events you'd plan a year in advance with a Pinterest board and a catering contract. In fact, a wedding as we think of it didn't exactly exist. There were no official religious ceremonies, no sacred vows spoken before priests. You got married by moving in together, and when you did, everyone noticed. Still, there was celebration. Families gathered, neighbors gossiped, and someone probably played a lute off-key. The bride might receive gifts, a necklace of faience beads, a new comb, maybe a small mirror polished to a silvery sheen. These weren't just tokens, they were symbols of a new role. As she stepped into her home, her status shifted. Now a woman of the house, a potential mother, a figure of respect, and sometimes a bit of fear. You see her now, sitting shyly on a low stool, while her friends weave fresh papyrus into her hair. She's painted her eyes with kohl, not just for beauty but protection. She smells faintly of myrrh and crushed lotus petals. She's young, nervous, and very aware of everyone watching. The groom isn't doing much, just pacing, occasionally adjusting his belt, then pretending not to. Marriage was as much a contract as a romance, especially among artisans and farmers. The man typically provided a declaration of marriage, and sometimes signed a document pledging to support his wife and any future children. These weren't just symbolic gestures. Some contracts detailed property rights, repayment clauses, and what happens if he takes another woman without her consent. Spoiler, it doesn't end well for him. One such contract from the New Kingdom era states that if the man ever divorces his wife without good reason, he must give her a hefty portion of his silver, grain and livestock. Not just love, leverage, and women knew it. Historians still argue whether women always held equal footing in practice, but on papyrus, at least the law often had their back. Back at the celebration, dancers sway to the beat of hand drums. A woman begins to sing, her voice high and tremulous at first, then warming as the verses roll out. It's a traditional wedding song, filled with metaphors of rivers and flowering reeds. One line repeats over and over, "You are the canal that quenches my field." Sensual, yes, but also economic. Very Egyptian. Food is passed around, bread fresh from domed ovens, dried fish, onions, pomegranates, and cups of beer strong enough to make you rethink your balance. There's a ceremonial toast, and an elder smirks as he gives the couple a fig, then adds, "So your house will always be sweet, and a little sticky," that earns some chuckles. As night falls, the bride is escorted to her new home. There's no giving away by a father. Instead, she walks in her own right, often accompanied by her mother or a close friend. Sometimes, she brings her dowry on a donkey, baskets of grain, jugs of oil, or even a goose or two tied to a stick. One Austrasian illustration shows a bride entering her husband's house with a cat under her arm. A quirky little detail, but who doesn't want to bring emotional support animals into a marriage? And yet, all around the ceremony, there's a palpable sense of nerves. This isn't just a party, it's a leap into the unknown. Many Egyptians married young, sometimes by their mid-teens. For some, the transition to adulthood felt natural. For others, it was abrupt. One letter from a young bride to her mother reads, "I miss your voice, your hands in my hair. I am not yet a wife in my heart, only in name." Quietly heartbreaking. You wander the edge of the gathering, and pass a table of elders placing bets, good-naturedly, of course, on how long the marriage will last. He can't cook. She hates geese. One season, one says. They both like beer. 2 years, another counters. There's laughter, but underneath it is truth. Not all unions last, and that was accepted. Divorce, while not celebrated, carried no shame. You could leave a marriage for many reasons. Infertility, infidelity, financial hardship, or just falling out of love. The most famous love triangle in Egyptian history involves a woman who left her husband for a temple scribe, then changed her mind, then left again. Her story is preserved in 3 conflicting court testimonies. Historians still argue whether she was empowered or simply unpredictable. Probably both. As the night winds down, you see the newlyweds sitting close together under a canopy. The crowd thins. Someone starts playing a slow rhythm on a harp. The bride rests her head on the groom's shoulder. They don't speak. They don't need to. There's something new growing here, shaky, but promising. You look up at the stars, same constellations the Egyptians saw, though they named them differently. Sopdet, the star of rebirth. Sar, the celestial hunter. Symbols of cycles, of renewal, of beginnings that look suspiciously like endings, and endings that slip back into beginnings again. And just like that, you're reminded love in ancient Egypt wasn't frozen in rituals, it was alive in moments like these, quiet, flickering, impossibly human. The sun is already climbing high, beating down on the ochre walls of the village, but you're headed in the opposite direction of the usual crowds. Today's not about weddings or poetry or sweet-smelling lotus perfume. Today's about something far less glamorous, but equally intimate. The practical, gritty realities of family life in ancient Egypt. You pass a mother carrying a toddler on her hip, the child swatting lazily at flies with a bundle of feathers tied together. Another walks beside her, dragging a small clay crocodile on a string. Toys like that weren't just make-believe. They were training. That little crocodile might one day save or end someone's life. Inside the home, it's a chaotic harmony. A father grinds grain into flour while humming. An older sibling fans the hearth to bake bread. Children squabble over scraps of linen being sewn into tunics. The family unit is less nuclear and more organic. Cousins, grandparents, neighbors, they come and go like the wind, blurring lines between immediate and extended. If you're picturing a big villa with tiled floors, adjust your expectations. Most lived in modest mud brick homes with 1 or 2 rooms, flat roofs, and maybe a courtyard if they were lucky. Beds, woven reeds, privacy, practically non-existent. And yet there was comfort in that closeness. You could hear every sigh, every laugh, every snore. It was noisy, yes, but it was home. Daily life was demanding. Children didn't get childhood as a prolonged phase. They pitched in early. By 6 or 7 they were helping fetch water, tend livestock, sweep courtyards, or assist in craft work. And when it came to education, boys from wealthier families might attend scribal school, if they could endure endless copying and a fair number of whacks with a rod. Girls, less likely. Their classroom was the home, their curriculum domestic mastery. But don't assume that meant silence or submission. Some women became respected midwives, musicians, or even property owners, especially if widowed. There's a sense of structure to family roles, but flexibility too. Ancient Egyptians believed in balance. If a husband was ill or away, the wife took charge. If an elder couldn't walk to temple, a child carried their offerings. One tomb scene even shows a grandmother chastising a boy while a parrot perches on her staff. The vibe? Eternal babysitter energy. Historians still argue whether these depictions were idealized or reflected actual norms. Did real families function as harmoniously as they appeared on tomb walls? Or were those images wishful thinking? A curated version of domestic life, meant to impress Osiris in the afterlife? The answer, most likely, lies somewhere in between. We do have private letters showing deep affection, parents writing to children, siblings sharing gossip, one child sending their father updates from a distant work site. But we also have curses. Yes, curses. One father, feeling betrayed by his son, inscribed a spell that basically said, "May your house fall, your crops wither, and your feet swell with boils." Harsh. You peek into a corner of a bustling home, where a woman carefully lays out a series of amulets near her sleeping baby. One shaped like a hippo goddess, Tawert, protector of mothers. Another shaped like a frog, symbolizing fertility. She murmurs a prayer that her child will grow strong and live longer than she will. It's a quiet, universal hope, one still whispered in bedrooms around the world. Then there's the subject of illness and death, which hovered near constantly. Life expectancy was short, perhaps 35 years if that. Infants especially faced high mortality. That made every surviving child not just a blessing, but a small miracle. Some families painted the name of a protective deity on their doorframe or tied hair strands into sacred knots to ward off evil spirits. Whether or not they worked, they provided comfort. Food was another cornerstone of family life. Not fancy fare but hearty. Lentils, leeks, onions, bread and beer, everyday fuel. Special occasions might involve meat or fish, if you lived near the Nile. Families shared meals on low stools or mats, scooping up lentils with flatbread and passing bowls in a slow, unspoken rhythm. One inscription reads, "A house with bread is a house at peace." A simple truth, passed down through crumbs and full bellies. You wander out to a rooftop where 2 sisters are sun-drying dates. One leans in to whisper a secret, then bursts into laughter, chasing the other with a date pit. The moment is unrecorded in any papyrus or stela, but it lives. This is the real Egypt, the one history forgets, because it's too quiet, too ordinary, too soft. And then there's parenting, which, if you were hoping, wasn't exactly gentle by today's standards. Disobedient children were met with stern words or even physical discipline. but affection existed too. Some tomb inscriptions mourned the loss of sons and daughters with lines like, "He was the light of my eyes, my home is dim without him." You can feel the heartbreak echoing through time. Family roles as depicted on walls and scrolls weren't static. They shifted with age, loss, fortune, and faith. A woman widowed young might never remarry. A man without sons might adopt his nephew as heir. And sometimes, entire households dissolved during famine or plague, only to reassemble again with new bonds. Neighbors becoming kin, servants stepping into parental roles, and you begin to notice there was no single shape a family had to be. The love they showed didn't always look like ours, but it functioned just the same. A mother waking early to pound grain, a child braiding her father's hair while he naps, a grandfather teaching his grandson how to carve a small wooden duck for a festival. No fanfare, no statues, no pyramids, just the daily thrum of human care. The next morning arrives, with the clatter of sandals on packed dirt and the occasional bleat of a goat being very vocal about its breakfast. But you're not lingering in the comfort of domestic scenes today. No, you're heading to one of the more mysterious and misunderstood corners of ancient Egyptian life, the world of temples, gods, and sacred rituals involving the body. Not just spiritual, but physical. Divine encounters in ancient Egypt weren't vague or purely symbolic. They involved touch, scent, rhythm, and sometimes rather suggestive metaphors. You're about to see how religion and sensuality weren't opposites. They were siblings, raised in the same household. You make your way toward a great temple complex. The outer walls are high and decorated with reliefs. Gods walking upright with animal heads, pharaohs striking poses of dominance over chaos. But step inside, and the mood changes. It's darker, cooler, the scent of incense is so strong it clings to your clothes. Somewhere, a sistrum, a kind of metallic rattle, shakes in rhythmic intervals. And in the far inner sanctum, a statue of a god is being undressed. Yes, undressed. Each day, temple priests performed what was essentially a royal spa treatment for divine statues. The god was awakened with chanting and incense, bathed with purifying oils, dressed in fresh linen, and fed with offerings of bread, beer, and meat. This wasn't just symbolic pampering. It was believed to maintain matter, the cosmic order. If the gods weren't pleased, crops failed, floods didn't come, and society frayed at the edges. The lines between reverence and intimacy blurred. Priests didn't just serve the gods, they touched them, adorned them, whispered to them, and in return, they believed they received sacred energy. Historians still argue whether these rituals were purely devotional, or if they fulfilled deeper psychological, even carnal, needs in a society otherwise steeped in modesty. One particularly charged ceremony was the opening of the mouth, a rite often performed on mummies, but originally intended for statues. The priest would touch various parts of the face and body with special tools, opening the eyes, ears, mouth, symbolically reanimating the figure, so it could breathe, eat, speak. Imagine standing there, watching a statue slowly wake up through sacred choreography. It's eerie, but undeniably sensual. Now step into the courtyard, where dancers move in slow, hypnotic rhythm. They're not just performing, they're invoking Hathor, goddess of love, beauty, music, and fertility. She was often worshipped in a very embodied way. Her festivals involved music, wine, feasting, and yes, dancing, that might make your grandma raise an eyebrow. One such festival, the Feast of Drunkenness, was held annually to honor how Hathor once nearly destroyed humanity, only to be calmed by beer dyed red, to look like blood. Egyptians would drink copiously, dance under the sun, and seek visions or spiritual messages through intoxication. It was religious ecstasy, quite literally. You'd leave the temple sunburnt, sore-footed, and possibly enlightened, or just dizzy. You pause at a wall relief showing Hathor nursing the pharaoh, who is depicted as a grown man. This isn't awkward to the ancient viewer, it's deeply symbolic. The king is being nurtured by the goddess, receiving divine wisdom and strength. But yes, it still looks a little strange if you're not used to the art style. Religion wasn't confined to temples. Amulets in the shape of body parts, eyes, hands, even genitals, were worn for protection and fertility. Household shrines often included fertility symbols or carved erotic figures, meant to encourage conception. One particularly curious object, the bee's statue, a squat, lion-faced dwarf god of household protection and childbearing, often shown sticking out his tongue or dancing wildly. Egyptians loved him so much, They even painted him on bedposts. It wasn't just about reverence, it was about humor, joy, physicality. You begin to understand, to them the divine was not sterile or distant. It was felt, in sweat, in music, in pleasure, and fear. One curious papyrus describes dream rituals where a priestess or initiate might sleep inside the temple, hoping to receive a visit from a god. These dream encounters were personal, sometimes intimate, and sometimes cryptic. A woman might emerge in the morning saying she was touched by Thoth, or embraced by Amun. What exactly happened in those dreams is left to interpretation, but it left lasting impressions. Historians still debate whether such experiences were psychological projections, drug-induced visions, or simply pious metaphor. But to the Egyptians, the line between physical and spiritual was permeable. The gods weren't just above you, they were in you, on you, and sometimes alarmingly close. And then there's the temple art. In some hidden chambers, rarely seen by outsiders, scenes of fertility rituals appear, figures entwined, offerings being made to ithyphalic gods like Min, who is always, shall we say, ready for action. His statues often feature lettuce, a plant believed to be both aphrodisiac and spiritually potent. Yes, lettuce. You'll never look at a salad the same way again. You step out into the sunlight again, dazed by the intensity of it all. The music has quieted, but the energy lingers. You realize that for the ancient Egyptians, sacredness wasn't found in denial of the body, but in embracing its rhythms, its urges, and its needs. The gods weren't offended by human passion, they required it, they mirrored it, they mythologized it. Divine love affairs, sacred unions, fertility rites, all reinforced that sensuality was part of the cosmic equation, not a threat to it. So as you watch the final rays of sun cast long shadows across the temple walls, you understand something essential. To the ancient Egyptian, holiness had texture, scent, movement, and sound. It was never still, never sterile. It was alive. You're back on the dusty path again, this time with the murmur of river reeds rustling behind you and the ever-present hum of insects that never seem to sleep. You're heading south along the Nile, drawn by curiosity and perhaps something deeper. Because while much of ancient Egypt's sensuality is painted on walls and etched in myth, some of it lingers in places less well preserved, quiet villages, desert shrines, tomb graffiti. This is where you'll find the more private stories, relationships lived, whispered, and sometimes hidden. Tonight, it's not just about kings and gods, it's about everyone else. How ordinary Egyptians navigated passion, attraction, and everything in between. Your sandals crunch on gravel as you reach a lesser-known workers' village, Deir el-Medina, built to house the artisans who carved and painted the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings. This place is unusually well documented. These weren't priests or nobles, just skilled laborers, living close together, their personal dramas preserved in letters, notes, even bathroom stall scribbles. Literally, graffiti inside a tomb shaft reads, "Neb was here, drunk and in love with Sherit." Another note scratched onto a potsherd scolds a man for sneaking into a married woman's house at night. One official letter complains about a neighbor playing music too loudly during intimate time, though it phrases it a little more poetically. It's refreshing to hear these ancient people in their own voices. Passionate, petty, romantic, very human. Relationships here weren't always bound by idealized temple vows. Court records show everything from marriage disputes to steamy love triangles. In one case, a woman sued her former partner for failing to return gifts and furniture after they separated. She was not playing around. Ancient Egyptians treated love, and its breakdown, with the seriousness of a contract. But not all was dramatic. One love poem from this period reads, "I wish I were your laundryman, that I could wash your clothes, touch your body, and be close to your scent." Sweet, no? You imagine someone scribbling that down on a scrap of linen, while nervously avoiding their crush's eye. Even the legal aspects of relationships were surprisingly modern. Women could initiate divorce, keep property, and raise children alone. One recorded agreement reads like an ancient prenup. "If he divorces me, he will give me 1/3 of the grain and all of the oil." You can't help but respect the level of planning. Historians still argue whether romantic love held the same weight back then as it does today. Some insist marriages were mostly transactional, social contracts for producing children and combining property. Others argue that affection, longing, and even jealousy were deeply felt and openly expressed. The truth is probably both. Jealousy wasn't just a personal feeling, it had spiritual implications. There were spells to keep rivals away, charms to ensure your partner's loyalty. One love spell involved baking bread with your toenail clippings, and feeding it to your lover. Romantic, questionable, committed, definitely. You pass a group of children pretending to be priests and priestesses, chanting in high-pitched tones and offering bundles of weeds to an imaginary god. Then you spot an older couple sitting near a house wall, sharing a bowl of dates. They barely speak, but the way he peels the skin off the date before handing it to her, it's a quiet, practiced tenderness that doesn't need words. The domestic love isn't flashy, it's practical, making sure there's water in the jar, patching each other's sandals, covering the sleeping child when the night breeze picks up. These are the gestures that filled centuries. But let's not forget the secrets. Tombs and papyri have also revealed the shadowy side of desire. Affairs, yes, but also forbidden love, maybe even same-sex attraction. One unusually ambiguous papyrus describes a close relationship between two male servants, sleeping arrangements included, but scholars debate whether it reflects romance or just proximity. Ancient Egypt was not overtly homophobic, but it also didn't preserve every kind of love story with the same care. And yet, we have hints. A satirical papyrus depicts men at a banquet, showing affection for each other, perhaps meant to mock elite behavior, but also acknowledging it existed. There are records of affection expressed between same-gender pairs in mortuary prayers and friendship poems. Nothing explicit, but just enough to raise eyebrows and questions. You duck into a humble house now, just 2 rooms, a reed mat, and a cooking pot still warm. It's empty, except for a scrap of faded papyrus stuck between stones in the wall. You lean in. It's a poem, barely legible. I dreamt of you again. The stars above us, your fingers like cool water. I wake with sand in my mouth. Was it ever meant to be read aloud, or was it hidden on purpose? Maybe they never dared say those words to the person they loved. That's the thing. History doesn't always give you the whole picture. Sometimes it just hands you a sliver of someone's longing, and leaves you to fill in the rest. Outside, the wind picks up, brushing sand across your path. You pause at a corner where someone etched a small heart, yes, heart-shaped, in the mud brick. Above it is the faint outline of 2 stick figures holding hands. Thousands of years ago, someone made a mark, just to say, we were here, we felt this, and now you've felt it too. You walk a little slower now, the weight of centuries pressing gently on your shoulders. The wind off the Nile carries a scent both ancient and ordinary. Wet clay, crushed papyrus, a faint trace of human sweat. You're heading back toward the heart of the city, where noise returns like a tide. Laughter from a courtyard, the shriek of a donkey, who clearly didn't sign up for this climate, and the bargaining din of the market. But tonight you're not here for bread or fish or perfume. You're here to explore what the marketplace really traded in: whispers, glances, possibilities. Because beyond papyrus and pomegranates, ancient Egyptians also exchanged flirtation. The open-air market wasn't just a center of commerce, it was where you went to see and be seen. You edge into the crowd. It's a flood of color and motion. Women with coal-darkened eyes and pleated linen dresses. Men in short kilts hauling baskets. Teenagers darting between stalls. The air is thick with spices. Coriander, cumin, something pungently sweet that might be date syrup burning on a brazier. A girl passes you with an armful of woven fans, and a look that says she knows you looked at her twice, because you did. Flirting, like everything else in Egypt, had a style. One love song scrawled on ostraca reads, "Your voice makes my heart flutter more than wine." Another compares a lover's walk to that of a goose, meant as a compliment somehow. Goose-like elegance must have been a thing. And yes, they had pick-up lines, poetic ones. "Would that I were the ring on your finger," reads one. "Would that I could lie beneath your bed, just to hear your breath." Honestly, it's surprising the papyrus didn't catch fire from the heat of that longing. Historians still argue whether these lines were actually used in everyday encounters, or just idealized expressions of love from scribes with too much time and too few dates. But if you ask me, someone definitely whispered that goose line in a crowded street, and hoped for the best. Then there were the cosmetics, tools not just of beauty, but of power. Both men and women wore makeup. Kohl wasn't just for looks. It protected against sun glare and infection, but it also made your eyes pop dramatically, especially when applied with a slender reed dipped in black powder. Lip color came from red ochre, cheeks too. Fragrance oils softened the skin and scented the body in a world where bathing daily wasn't always realistic. You can almost see someone applying it slowly in the polished surface of a copper mirror, checking the angle of their face, adjusting the fall of their hair. Vanity wasn't a sin. It was expected. Marriage was the goal, of course. But dating, that was a game of reputation and timing. Egyptian society expected modesty in public, especially for women. but behind closed doors or in private gardens, the rules relaxed. Courting often happened in those tucked-away moments, shared water jugs, glances during harvest, notes passed between baskets of figs. The idea of virginity was respected but not obsessively guarded. Love poetry hints that premarital relationships existed, especially among those not yet betrothed, and the age of marriage, often young, especially for girls. But again, nuance matters. Some evidence suggests women married later if they were economically independent or involved in temple life. One quirky tidbit: some magical spells were used not to start relationships but to end them. A fragment describes a woman burning scraps of her lover's clothing while reciting phrases meant to cool his desire. Apparently ghosting someone was tricky in a town of 3,000 people, so a little sorcery helped set boundaries. And yet, for all the ritual, romance often bloomed in mundane settings. You walk past a bakery now, where a young man is clumsily offering flatbread to the girl kneading dough in the back. She pretends not to see him. He lingers, waiting. She finally glances over with the tiniest smile, and the transaction is complete. Not the bread, the flirtation. You pass another house where an older woman is chiding her daughter not to spend too much time with the brewer's son. His beer is sour, and his tongue is too sweet, she mutters. Generational wisdom, wrapped in rhyme. And what of matchmaking? Yes, there were go-betweens. Mothers, sisters, aunties, always ready to suggest a suitable match or warn of unsuitable ones. But arranged marriages weren't the only kind. Autonomy varied by class, family status, and the ever-complicated whims of love itself. Marriage contracts often included clauses about fidelity, support and property, especially in cases where the wife brought substantial assets. But love wasn't required. Respect, cooperation and children were the pillars of a successful union. Anything else, well, that was extra. Still, you find a letter preserved in a jar, written by a husband traveling away for work. I sleep alone, and I miss your voice in the doorway. Tell our daughter to eat her beans. Tell our son not to chase the goose. I'll be home soon. It doesn't sound like passion. It sounds like real love. You move on, past the olive press, past the scribe's bench, toward the river again. The sky is burning orange now, smeared with dusk. You can almost see them, two lovers meeting by the reeds, pretending to fish, while their hands brush just enough to make the air hum. The rituals of attraction haven't changed much in 3,000 years. Neither has the awkwardness, the guessing, the thrill. So whether it was in the marketplace or by moonlight, through spells or poems, or a shared piece of bread, desire in ancient Egypt was always there. Quiet, clever, resilient, just like today. The moon is full now, casting pale silver across the Nile as you step onto a quiet embankment. Crickets sing in steady rhythm, and frogs croak from unseen crevices in the mud. It's a tranquil night, but your mind drifts to something less serene. Secrets. The kind whispered behind linen veils and scrawled hastily onto broken pottery. Because while ancient Egypt certainly sang hymns to love and passion, it also had its shadows, infidelity, taboos, and deeply buried scandals. You sit beside a half-collapsed wall, the stones cool against your back, and listen. Somewhere in the hush, you can almost hear the clink of jewelry being unfastened in secrecy, the rustle of linen in the dark, the soft hush of a door being quietly drawn shut behind someone who shouldn't be there. Adultery in ancient Egypt wasn't just a personal betrayal, it was a legal offense. For married women especially, the stakes were high. While men had more social wiggle room to take concubines or visit prostitutes, a woman caught cheating could face exile, mutilation, or death. That said, punishment wasn't always enforced. Social class connections and discretion mattered a lot more than any rule carved in limestone. There's a tale from the 20th dynasty of a high-status woman who took a lover from a lower class. When discovered, she wasn't executed, just quietly removed from her position. Her lover, however, vanished from records entirely. Historians still argue whether he was imprisoned, killed, or simply erased. You shift slightly. The stone beneath you is engraved with faint hieroglyphs, likely once part of a shrine. But the symbols here don't speak of gods or offerings. They're part of a curse. Something like, "May the betrayer's tongue dry to dust." Not exactly subtle. And what about same-sex relationships? We return again to one of the most debated cases in Egyptology, the tomb of Neankhnum and Khnumhotep, two male officials from the 5th dynasty. Their burial place is unusually intimate. The men are depicted embracing, touching noses, a gesture reserved for married couples. Some scholars interpret this as evidence of a romantic relationship. Others insist they were brothers, or simply close friends. The debate continues, heated and unresolved, but the images remain, timeless and tender, carved into stone by someone who wanted their bond remembered. Then there's the Book of the Dead, that collection of spells and instructions for navigating the afterlife. While most spells deal with protection, judgment and resurrection, a few make curious mentions of pleasures denied to the unfaithful and joys reserved for the pure, implying perhaps that one's behavior in life, romantic or otherwise, echoed into eternity. Still, the Egyptians weren't all fire and brimstone. There was nuance, even playfulness. Take the tale of the priestess, who was caught having a relationship with a temple musician. Rather than punishment, she was relocated to a different shrine, and the musician, he was promoted. Scandalous or strategic? Hard to say, maybe a bit of both. One quirky tidbit, love spells often had a strangely obsessive tone. A papyrus from Thebes records a spell asking the goddess Hath to bind the heart, the eyes, the legs, the mouth of the target, essentially making them helplessly lovesick. And while that's deeply unsettling, the scribe follows it with a love poem, as if to say, no hard feelings, be mine forever. You get the sense that passion in Egypt was a bit like the Nile itself, beautiful, dangerous, and sometimes prone to flooding its banks. Prostitution, for instance, wasn't illegal, but existed in a grey zone. Some women worked as entertainers and dancers in houses of pleasure, which might have doubled as brothels. The lines were blurry. A record from a workers' village shows wages paid to a singer, who spent most of her time in the foreman's house. Draw your own conclusions. What's clear is that sexuality wasn't hidden, it was managed. The gods themselves often set the tone. Seth, the chaotic god, is associated with both violence and transgressive sexual behavior. In one myth, he assaults Horus in an attempt to assert dominance. The gods later hold a kind of divine courtroom drama over it. The story is bizarre, symbolic, and oddly bureaucratic, like most mythologies, if we're honest. Even Isis, the great mother goddess, used seduction as a tool. In one myth, she tricks Ra into giving up his secret name by coaxing it from him in a vulnerable moment. Power and passion were rarely far apart. You rise from your stone seat, brushing dust from your hands. The air is cooler now, heavy with the scent of damp earth and fading lotus blossoms. A temple looms nearby, half in ruins. You peek inside. There on the inner wall, a frieze shows lovers entwined, not in erotic detail, but in gesture. Arms around shoulders, eyes closed, heads touching, tenderness carved into eternity. Outside, you pass a shrine where couples used to leave offerings, flowers, oils, even bits of poetry, for Hathor, goddess of love. A fragment reads, "You are my breath when the sun is cruel, my water when I thirst, my song when the wind is quiet." You wonder who wrote it, whether their love lasted, whether they returned together in the afterlife, as promised. Egyptians believed that love could transcend death, that soulmates could be reunited beyond the veil, holding hands in the field of reeds, young and beautiful again, forever. It's not a bad thought to hold on to, especially now, because as you look up at the stars, yes, those same stars lovers watched 3,000 years ago, it feels like their whispers never really left. They're just waiting for someone quiet enough to listen. You walk slowly now, the sand soft beneath your feet, trailing the banks of the Nile like a thread through time. The moon floats above you, still, pale, eternal. All around the world sleeps, but your mind drifts to one final curious realm of ancient Egyptian intimacy, the afterlife. Because here's the question that historians and dreamers alike keep circling. What happened to sex and love after death? You pass a field of tall papyrus swaying like murmurs in the dark. In the distance, a dog barks once, then silence. The field of reeds, Egypt's version of paradise, wasn't some sterile marble heaven. It was a mirror of earthly life. Just better, richer, greener. No sickness, no taxes, and yes, no heartbreak. You'd be reunited with your loved ones, your pets, even your favorite wine if you played your spells right. But did people still love in the afterlife? Touch, kiss? Well, some texts suggest yes. Tomb inscriptions refer to husbands and wives spending eternity together, in pleasure and in embrace. A few even go so far as to promise renewed passion in the next world. It's not exactly PG rated, but also not graphic. Egyptians were poetic like that. One mainstream belief was that the Ka, your spiritual double, could enjoy food, drink, music, and even sex, if properly nourished with offerings. That's why tombs were so elaborate. They weren't just about ego, they were a kind of eternal honeymoon suite. You pause at a crumbling wall where a pair of seated figures are painted hand in hand. No crowns, no gods, just a man and woman, looking at each other like they're the only souls in creation. It's simple, quiet, powerful. And then there's the Book of Caverns, one of the more theatrical funerary texts. In it, the journey to the afterlife includes traversing caverns, guarded by fearsome beings and gates sealed by magical words. But nestled among these trials is a recurring image: rebirth. Over and over, the dead are described as being revived with joy, joined with beloveds, and given their hearts again. Some scholars suggest this is metaphor, symbolizing spiritual completeness. Others say it means exactly what it says: your soul could love again, fully and freely. And that's where things get even more fascinating. Because not every tomb was for a married couple. Some were built for two friends, two brothers, or two people with no family ties at all, just a deep chosen bond. The tomb of Niankhunum and Khnum-Hotep, which we talked about earlier, wasn't the only one to suggest eternal companionship that defied convention. There's even one tomb, rarely discussed, where the inscriptions mention a woman and her female scribe being of one heart, one breath. Historians still argue whether this was platonic, professional, or something more. The ambiguity is kind of the point. You find yourself thinking, how much of human connection has always existed in the spaces between words? The glances, the hands brushed in passing, the unspoken promises. Maybe that's what the Egyptians were honoring when they carved their stories into stone. Not just the names or titles, but the feelings we carry. One quirky tidbit: some spells were written not just to summon protection, but to keep a lover faithful in the afterlife. Yes, even in eternity, jealousy apparently followed close behind. One fragment reads, "May he look at no other but me, even when the stars are old." Possessive, absolutely. Romantic, in a clingy kind of way. You pass the open gates of a temple now, half swallowed by sand. Inside, a statue of Hathor gazes up at the sky, arms open as if embracing something long vanished. Her face is serene, powerful. She was the goddess not only of love and pleasure, but also of transition, guiding souls from life to death, from loneliness to union. And in this moment, the ancient Egyptians feel astonishingly modern. They didn't separate love from death. They wove it all together: desire, memory, faith, and longing. You sit down on a slab of stone, once part of a mortuary temple, and watch the river. Somewhere behind you the city sleeps. The past is quiet, but your thoughts are still humming with life. With priests whispering vows, lovers sneaking into shadowed gardens, widows leaving offerings by candlelight. It all loops back: the flirtation in the marketplace, the poems in the night, the awkward pickup lines, the scandals, the magic, the grief, the hope, the promises carved in hieroglyphs, and at the end of it all, a wish for eternity, not just for life itself, but for the people who made it worth living. You exhale slowly. The night air is cooler now, soft against your skin. You close your eyes, and just before sleep finds you, a final thought drifts by, quiet and sure. In the oldest stories, love always survives. You've wandered through temples, tombs, and whispered corners of ancient Egypt. You've stepped into sandaled feet, tasted honeyed dates, and listened to secrets pressed into broken pottery. And now, as the Nile gently flows and the stars hang soft in the sky, it's time to let all of it fade. The warmth of a sun long set still lingers in the stones beneath you. Every shadow has stretched into calm. Every breeze is a lullaby. Let the hushed rustle of reeds and distant ripple of water slow your breath. Let the worries of the day melt away like candle wax in the desert heat. Nothing here asks anything of you. No questions, no decisions, just the weightless drift into sleep, where time has no hold, and your thoughts dissolve like ink in water. The ancient world may be far, but its rhythms are familiar. The tenderness, the longing, the comfort of being known. Let them wrap around you like a linen shroud, not of mourning but of rest. And if you dream tonight, maybe you'll see a figure by the river, waiting, smiling, just like you imagined. Sleep well, traveler.